So the brown bags are kind of an attempt to start a dialogue with the City Commission on behalf of the Planning Department. We don't really, other than when we have current planning cases, do we get out in front of you very often. And so we'd like to, as we get into trickier problems and more robust work as we evolve through the reorganization, we wanted to use this opportunity to touch base. And I'll follow this presentation up with one of the end goals is to try to get towards a capital improvement plan. I'm going to use the word capital more as a program improvement plan or project improvement plan, but this idea that you have an idea of a all-inclusive work plan on behalf of the planning department, and then that not that it can't change, but this idea that we kind of set our priorities in motion a year at a time. And so, as you know, I'm first year and a half into the reorganization of the planning department and as planning director, but I will like to say that we recognize the legacy that Jim Gilmore, Pat Zavrall, Dan Molley, Jim Hinderaker, my predecessors laid as part of the foundation of the planning department. We're kind of in a new era where we have a lot of moving targets, but at the same time, we recognize that we're blessed and lucky that Jim and Dan and other leaders are still in our community. So it's a nice place to be as we transition. And so we spent the last year and a half on kind of why do we do what we do, and understanding that transition, and our goal today is to really start to talk about that engagement and how we coordinate and communicate amongst between what's your preference as commissioners and that dialogue with the planning department and the community at large. So maybe a little snapshot. We've had a lot of transition in our department as a whole, and so you might not see everybody but me and Donald at City Commission on a regular basis. And so just a quick snapshot in this transition that our average tenure now in our department is 6 years. We went from 12 to 6. We have 15 employees. The average age is 33. 9 out of 15 grew up in the region, and I would say 9 out of 15 have returned here or moved here because of opportunities. And so it's kind of fun as we have a little bit of everything in our department. So as we test and talk about quality of life issues, where a lot of times it's easy to talk about firsthand experiences. One of the things that is sometimes not recognized is we've had 17 staff transitions in the last 24 months, and maybe only 5 of those are related to the reorganization. Most of the others either were based on other priorities and goals that they found in our community, or life changes. And we also had several retirements. So how do we become primarily stable as we have so many transitions? And that's why you also probably see new faces. If you go to our boards and commissions meeting, you'll see a lot of new young faces, and which some of them are here in our office. I'll just introduce Maggie here in our office back there. But at any case, which requires us to do some cross-training of staff, so we don't have to stop programs or ideas of projects as people go on leave. Communicate those expectations. So sometimes that means we have to both for our champions and our liaisons and our commissioners, as you know, sometimes we have to communicate expectations, and sometimes that information isn't pleasant to hear. So we're working on communication training as we figure out how to communicate best on expectations and components that might be difficult to communicate about. How do we integrate data and technology so that we have information and resources we can share at a regional level as well as locally, and then really understanding how important our partnerships are. They're actually vital, and I'll hit on all of those points. So the first step in our transition is why are we doing what we are doing? Some of our operations and programs have been in place since for 20 years plus. Who is our audience and what is our goal? And how do we adapt to change and incorporate transparency, flexibility, and adaptation? And part of that is sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and as we get new information, how do we change and transition along the way and not be rigid in our policies, programs, or procedures? So it's a delicate balance, and we're training our staff to be flexible as well. So we've introduced 2 new divisions besides the community development and current planning. And we still, I noticed last week, carry language from the old city hall where we say that side of the office or this side, even though now we're all still in one building. And, but we now have community development is led by Tia, and urban development led by Megan, long-range planning Aaron, and current planning Donald. A little bit I want to start to talk to you about as we go into our organization is what is our priority in the coming year, and what have we been working on, what is our priority, and where are maybe some of those gaps. So in community development, our priority is HUD and federal funding. We spend a lot of time working on we've got a workout plan, we've introduced that, I believe, to you. And basically we're now on a quarterly reporting period for the next year or so. We're getting ready to kick off our consolidated plan. But our primary purpose for this community development program now is how to connect needs in our community that we hear through engagement with activities through funding. So it's not necessarily doing the work, but it's how do we engage it through funding and enable that work. And then the main topics are HUD, housing rehab, and we've restructured our housing rehab program quite a bit, thanks to Bruce Charleston's team after Bob Miller's retirement. But then we'll continue to transition that as we find more discoveries. And then you'll see some more talk as we talk about restructuring their social services program. In urban development, we have the site plan permitting is our probably #1 priority. That's, the wheels fall off the truck if we don't have our site plan permitting process working well. And, but our primary purpose is really aligning the built environment with quality of life. And so that's done through the Renaissance Zone, downtown planning, Arts and Culture Commission, historic preservation, implementing the EPA grant, the Renaissance Zone update, and the Civic Plaza are also integrating into that. So anytime you think about the built environment and architectural services, things like that, we look towards Megan. And then the long-range planning is really our first attempt at integrating a strategic thinking through our office. So that's really getting the tools that we can use to work with as we plan forward. So that's as you know, very recently, the Land Development Code Diagnostic Kickoff and the Core Neighborhood Plan Kickoff. But really our main topics is how to integrate long-range transportation, the data management, our partnerships with our agencies, and really that component of transportation, because all land use and transportation connection is probably the primary #1 issue in item and focus in planning in general. And then current planning, really our purpose is to focus on the customer service. That's really our front lines of our office. We're really looking at how can we assist people in cross-cutting rules, ordinances, development programs. A lot of times there could be, sometimes there could be conflicts in the Century Code and start to navigate those processes. And our main topics related to the pre-development activities, annexation, plats, and zoning, which is why we're in front of you with those activities mostly every 2 weeks. The priority that Donald's been working on is the LLAMA, which is the building permitting software system, and through Bruce's office and IT, and then also kicking off our census complete count, which you'll be hearing more about that over the course of the next months, but the vital importance of that complete count. Donald had leadership in that back in Williston, and this is also to represent how, again, that rigidity, we're looking at flexibility on staff. So even though Donald's primary responsibilities include the day-to-day operations of the planning department, he's also got side projects going on as well, and then we're looking towards his leadership on other activities. So you might wonder how we spend our time. And so as a quick assessment on that, we have permits. Another word for permits is really the entitlement procedures. The projects, those are projects that kind of stop and start. So we aren't necessarily, they could be 2 years, 5 years, 1 year. And then our HUD operations, that's again vital to getting assistance in our community. The customer service, that would be your walk-in traffic, directory assistance. I was joking with Bruce Grubb that if you call information in the city of Fargo, you get the planning department. And I don't know if that's still true, but a lot of times we're the directory service. And then programs as well. So if that's the parking programs, the arts and culture programs, rehab programs. So what will happen, and so this is a snapshot in time today and what we've been kind of working with in this last 2 quarters. But what will happen is we get into a construction boom, you'll see that yellow category go larger, maybe up to 60%, And or if we have some big projects or heavy spending on HUD, you might see that red go up. And so it's a kind of constantly shifting pieces of pie. And as part of that, though, it's important to recognize, you know, where we're at with these things, and if you see a difference in what you want our time spent on. So next, that leads me to governance and oversight. And even kind of new into the department, or in my new role in the department, I wasn't aware of some of these boards and commissions and their missions and priorities. Some of them were being previously led by interns on staff, or maybe had side projects, or maybe only met quarterly. And so it's really evolved over the last year and a half as we established our roles with board members. About a third of our board members have been on their boards, respective boards, since their inception. And then we have onboarding of new members who just think it's an interesting topic, and through Commissioner Grinberg and Commissioner Strand, who are my liaisons, by the way, through their interview process have helped us vet some incoming new board members as well. And so, so beyond these boards, of course, we also staff the City Commission and MetroCog, as well as internal operations like the Finance Committee, Utility Committee, PUPEC, and Downtown Task Force. So we are living by our calendar, and that's just the reality of life. I know everybody does, and but it's really vitally important that second and third week of the month is crucial for us. And so our anxiety all picks up a little bit those 2 weeks, and I don't know why, but everybody wants to meet the third something of the month. And so with that, we've instilled some new, what could be perceived as more rigid business practices. And I've gotten a little bit of pushback on it, but we think it's necessary to keep our staff organized. And that's having agenda deadline submittals, bylaws, work plans, authority, understanding what our authority rests, what our mission is, calendar management, action, that they're action-oriented meetings, and that we have quorums before we meet. So for instance, we're waiting, we have thought about canceling the Arts and Culture Commission that's supposed to meet this Wednesday because we're having trouble getting a quorum. We've put in place a 24-hour kind of call because Brian's time, everybody's time, it takes about $1,000 a meeting is what we've estimated in terms of costs. And that's just for staff time, not including all of this beautiful space. So some projects, I won't read through all of these, but what I will do is follow up with a small report that would be kind of our first stab at a strategic plan for the planning department, so you can look at these in a little bit more detail. But see that these are the goals, the primary goals of each of these boards and commissions. And I should preface as staff sees them versus maybe some of the board members see them. So we're still working on strategic plans with many of our boards and commissions, but as we highlight our priorities and goals. So the Arts and Culture Commission, we're about 18 months into a collaboration with the Convention and Business Bureau, where we're both bringing money to the table with a public art project. And so that takes a lot of negotiations and coordination with the public, the CVB, the Plains Art Museum, and partners around the region. And I'll highlight a couple critical things, like the renewal plan on the Renaissance Zone Authority. That is due to the state by the end of the year, and so that's obviously a primary focus on that. So we've had to, as part of this process, kind of change of how we've always done things and understand how we communicate about expectations. And so I'm just going to use downtown as an example of how we're doing that. First of all, it's clarifying that role. What's the role of the staff? What's the role of our partners? And defining that between operations versus policies and programs. So like on the picture on the left, with the bid and the trash, we know we have many partners throughout the city of Fargo. That includes solid waste, engineering, public works, not just the planning department. And then on the new wraps on the utility boxes, that also required a lot of partnership. It was the DCP who came up, or the bid, who came up with the idea. It was through our sponsorship, but through partnerships with the Arts Partnership, that we are able to even find artists to do this work. And so, how do we become facilitator, the messenger, and empower and engage versus the doer or the maker. I like to remind people, my staff laugh at me, but like we don't have trucks and we don't have crews. And so it's about finding our partners who do have the trucks and the crews and coordinating that. And then, so I use this as an example because with, you know, kind of a sensitive subject for the planning staff, because sometimes we feel like we're failing in this department, is as we look at replacing Bob Stein's retirement, Joe Niggs change, Derek's change. You know, I get the question of who's replacing them, who's the downtown planner. And I would say it's Mark, Megan, Maggie, and like, what's the issue that you're trying to find and discover? Then we'll direct you accordingly instead of just being the catch-all answer. And so how do we become more effective communicators and then empower? I know in our direct communication with Melissa and as president, she very much likes that role, but her constituents might not like that role. And so it's how we establish that expectation and company. So by all means, if that's not something you agree with as the commission and we want to further evaluate this is where I need your feedback. Because this is again, it's vitally important for our partners to succeed, because if our partners don't succeed, then we don't succeed. And then all of a sudden we're the ones taking out the trash, you know? And so literally, and so, so really, how does that relationship work and where are we best suited? So this is how I've resolved some of those issues and questions in my head, and this is where that feedback is important. So this slide is specifically for the mayor, because the mayor is constantly teasing me about what are your celebrations. And so our celebrations on what we've accomplished for the year, as we kind of go into that next phase of what we've done this year and where we want to go next year, and over the course of the next 18 months, is really trying to manage the open grants and funds that we have. So we closed out some of them, the Fargo project, a 10-year project that you're all are aware of as we evolve those, get some new technology. We've been working with Gate City Bank on the NRI enhancement and some more updates on that soon to come probably. And one that I'm kind of proud of, I know it's a contention topic for tonight on the City Commission agenda, but the ROARS entitlement process with the Newman ROARS project, because while it might not be everybody happy at the end, it's 3 to 4 long years of staff's focused, concentrated time. And so we'll be anxious to see how it works out. And then the Wahpeton Community Homes transfer, there'll be some more coming out about that in August, but a lot of these are behind the scenes and not really public. So for instance, we've been working with HUD on the community homes closing and those vouchers coming to Fargo, and then working with our partners, the Housing Authority and Beyond Shelter. And so hopefully tomorrow we'll have a big announcement about the budget authority of 90 more units coming to Fargo a month, and for the next 15 years. And so those are the kinds of things that it's hard for the public to see what we do when it's really a lot of paper pushing and phone calls and communications. So as we go into the next year, I kind of start talking about next year because HUD works on mid-year cycles, but really one of my primary goals that me and the staff wish for is one work plan as opposed to one separate work plan for each of our boards and commissions. You know, how do we integrate all of that work into a coordinated effort? And I've got some ideas on that, but this is where some of that engagement with you and as we proceed into next year. And
particularly on that, the commissioners should know is that one of the things the call would like us to look at, do we have too many boards? Could we do some stuff with just a smaller amount of boards, or what type of staff support do we need for all the boards? Because could some of them independently run or whatever? And I think initially it was an attempt to get involvement of the community to the city of Fargo, but have we gone past that now and new things going on? Is there a different way of doing it? So to each of you with your liaison relationships, I'd like you to think about that, or is there a better way of doing it? Because sometimes we continue historically doing boards because they've always been there, but I think Nicole's asked the question, is there should we head a different direction? In fact, like Dave, Parking Commission was really only supposed to think about parking zones. It really is not electric cars or a lot of the other things that come on that area. So it's kind of a question, keep to your mission.
Yeah, and thank you, Mayor. I am working on strategic plans with each of the boards and commissions, and some have been successful, some have not been successful, and it's taught me a lot on. I've wrestled with this question quite a bit in terms of the wrestling of, we want the democratic process. We want the voice. We have 83 volunteers we work with that are dedicated, passionate, and engaged. And so we don't want to make light of that at all. But then when I look at Ben Dow, sometimes I'm a little jealous that he can go plow a street without asking anybody. And so, and I'm not trying to make light of operations and policies, but how do we get some independence? And now that we have a 15 staffed department, how do we get some of that freedom to work and progress the discussion and work to where the target is and where that focus is and who are better in our partners. And so it's a very complex discussion, and we're not going to solve it today, but just by getting one work plan and getting our priorities focused and our role in those, that's a place to start. And so one of the things that we use a decision tree to decide what we're going to work on. And because that was what I did the first year, is just kind of inventory, like, what are we working on? Who are we doing this for? And what is our priority? And so we came up with a metric, and this is where I'd like your input as well, is this is a metric that we started to use to prioritize. Is it a mandate? For instance, the Renaissance Zone, if we don't get that plan submitted, we will not have a Renaissance Zone program. Is it recurring, or is it one time? Is it, are we going to serve multiple partners and benefit a community at large? Or are we serving one group, independent group? And is this project or program tied into an adopted strategy? Again, this is where Go 2030 ties in, our Downtown and Focus plan, things like that. If we are creating a new program, how are we going to go into operations? So I think about the Gladys Ray shelter, which had a lot of heavy lifting by the planning department and our city administration. But right now, the lovely part about it is it's all in health, and so we can be there as a liaison and support for the health department as they look at expansions and other needs, but we're not the experts in homeless care, and so that's exactly the types of partnerships we want to create throughout the entire project and process. And then who is our champion, and so when we look at champions, so we have again, as part of our report, I'll give you, we have project summary sheets that I ask if someone's got an idea. Again, ideas are easy, implementation is hard. And so, so we do this project summary flush out. And the project summary sheet has these questions on there, and it tells us how we kind of start to formulate it. And then we'll start to show those to the people that are asking for these ideas and projects to be shared. What blank spots are we missing? So as we go into, and I'll wrap up here, and I really do want to open up for dialogue. I have about like 6 more slides. And so as we go into next year, these are the kinds of things that I kind of wrestle with, the staff wrestle with, and the kind of interesting things are happening at a national level too. And so again, where is the immigration of people and families coming from? Why are they coming here to Fargo? And how can we make this, include them in our activities and needs? What are the construction drivers? You're not gonna like this, but are we on the cusp of a recession? I don't know, and so Tony's looking at me like, yeah, I said the R word. But the current housing market, sorry for the typos, marketing needs and future housing needs. And what are the things in Minneapolis and as it relates to poverty impacts? What are they doing that might have a carryover effect here in Fargo? Are there some lessons learned, as some of these big cities experiment with these tough problems? And then I don't know if you saw the Minnesota Post article talking about the quick rising costs of housing in Fargo and what are the drivers of that. So we answer those questions through activities like the Land Development Code diagnostic, the Core Neighborhood Plan, and the HUD Consolidated Plan, which is a mandated 5-year plan update, where we're seeking input from the public, we're doing needs assessments, and we're coordinating those into a strategic plan. And all of those kind of questions engage into that. And we work with consultants, both at a national and local level, as well as staff and our partners at large in our community, to really figure out what the answer is for Fargo. And one of the things that keeps high on the list, I keep reminding people, is our rate of growth, and that we can't be shy about that. We need to be thinking about that constantly. And so and as we compare to that population growth in the rest of the country, when we compare the West and the South and the East, it's really, whenever we have consultants coming here, they always remind me, Nicole, you guys are growing. That's a good thing. And, a lot of them come from communities that aren't growing or understand what's at risk. But as we know, we have about, 1,500 households a year moving to Fargo, and where are the people coming from? So one of the things I thought it'd be fair to show you is sometimes we get called to do presentations at school district or Rotary or service clubs, things like that. And one of the things that I use is this slide to represent that one of the things we're trying to communicate about is how do we manage change, and what are those expectations on change. And so what's right in some areas is not going to be right universally in the Fargo region. And so some neighborhoods are experiencing stagnation, some are craving stability, and some are changing. And what are those influences that affect those, and how do we study those? So what does change look like at different parts of the city is going to be different. When we're working with consultants, rest assured that our staff presents that common knowledge that a lot of maybe consultants don't always remember, like that we are flat and that we have overland flooding and that we have transportation barriers. I think the transportation barriers are probably one of the most unique drivers of our how we lay out our city and address our needs. You can see the school district wrestling with that right this second, right? And so so again, as we start to do some initial analysis is, where does densification belong? Where does status quo belong? And what are those changes? You'll see us dig into this as we go into the next year, especially with our land development code, and how does single family housing style change? And so you're all familiar with the controversies that come with townhome developments and increased density. And so as we start to bridge those discussions on what the needs are and why. We look at households and jobs, and every 5 years kind of estimate where they might land in our city. And this is an exercise through MetroCog as part of our TAS data. But we recognize that those increases affect the whole region, not just that southwest quarter of the city. And so again, the service needs, the business needs, are going to affect the whole metro. And so those are all elements. So last year we engaged with A2S to do a short, quick study because I was really curious on what our latest rate of land consumption is. And one of my fears is just, we might run out of land, in terms of easy development, what I call easy greenfield development. And so as part of that, we looked at they created a model for us, and this is just kind of a template of that model. It's not anything that's adopted or real, but it's basically looking at our growth scenarios. If we grow at 3.2 people per acre versus 3.8 people per acre, what does that rate of land consumption look like, and what might that mean for geographic distribution and schools and park facilities, et cetera. And so that's the kind of level that we hope to be engaging in further in our long-range planning division. So I'm going to end here with really the next steps and your input. What today's goal is one, to introduce you a little bit on how is the planning department ticking right now? What are we working on? What are the things that we're kind of wrestling with? How do we engage with our partners deeper? How do we stay focused and efficient? And so, so that's part of what we're wrestling with, as well as project priorities and work plan. And so I hope to start to work with you, if this is something you want as a communication style, work plans that would come in front of you as adoptions, and then and that you might think of that as too structured, or you might think of it as not structured enough? And then how do we continue this engagement and coordination? And so particularly, again, exciting things like the HUD transfer, the voucher transfer from Wabaton is a reminder of, again, our community at large doesn't know what the staff is working on. And so as we communicate that information on how the planning department best serves the public and you, I don't know if that's through, websites, newsletters, kind of announcements and recognizing we're a little weak in that outward communication. And so looking towards your guidance on how much information you want and how much information is like too much. And so with that, I'll stop and I'll probably go sit over there. And if you want me to go back to any slides, I'll maybe bring the mouse with me. So.
Can I ask a question to start it out? So, and this is for any of the staff. So, when you look at the projects and the list of all the commissions, like Nicole talked about, there's some that are mandated or that are mandatory, but then the rest of them, I think there's some that, are you looking at possibly combining some, like when you talked about that? If you could talk about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and this is, in all fairness, I have had zero conversation with some of our boards and commissions because they're so focused on the work. But I think there's some components that are overlapping, and then there's some components that I think that maybe could best be served outside the city with a liaison back to the city somehow. And so one of my, we've been brainstorming at the staff level, one of my dreams, I guess, and experiments, if you will, would be maybe just getting a chair from each of those boards and commissions, gathering them around the table and talking to them about this issue and seeing if they could best serve relationship with conversation with the planning department, and then they go back to their constituents, their boards, and then it becomes more of community groups. I see lots of things wrong with that model as well, and so I guess it's something to further study.
If I ask one more follow-up, the other thing is that there's so many neighborhood groups now that are becoming more and more active, and so that's not on there, but do you have something in mind that could be incorporated into something like that?
Yeah, we've been talking a little bit with the Community Development Committee, for instance, I think captures some of those components. Ken Enochson, is mindfully placed on the Community Development Committee to kind of help represent that component. But yes, I think so much of this dialogue happens, again, outside the city, inside the city, and then where does that information land, and how does that information then get distributed to everybody? And so I do like the boards and commissions as a focus place for information coming to the city that we need to work on. They might not all need to be staffed, or they might not all need minutes, or they might not all need, airtime, trying to think about some of those efficiencies.
Who's next? Just a couple comments, and Commissioner Strand and I are coming into our 4th year now, and can't speak for him, but I've learned a lot about planning in the three years and the role of the city and the growth of the city. And Nicole made mention of the young staff, the change in demographics of our team, whether it's retirements or finding a better opportunity. I see that as a huge opportunity for Nicole as a leader of planning to build a team to move the city to the next level. A lot of that foundation was laid by Mr. Gilmore with his acumen and dedication to the city. And so, what I'm excited about is, and I firmly believe you develop a plan, you work a plan. Doesn't mean the plan can't change, but at least you know where you're going. And that's what largely has been presented here today. Is it makes sense to me. It looks like it's looking to the future, and then be able to manage that, to be able to report on progress. And I take that a step further. I think all departments, and again, Bruce, maybe you could help me out, or Mayor, if there's, these are similar activities of other departments, but imagine a budget process where every department head has to come in and lay out their goals and objectives, and then their budget requirements, and then quarterly, semi-annually reporting on the progress on working our plan, whether it's engineering or whether it's, operations with Mr. Dow. That's where I think, that we got to continue to take this dialogue forward, so there's more of an arching strategic plan for the city, and then we're measuring how we're doing, and we're being transparent about it. This should all be on the website, and then those that are interested in the public that want to understand what have we done, we can say, here's where we're going. And then adding, the timing of all this and the presentation today on the heels of the LDC and the core neighborhood plans, I think will really strengthen and move the city forward and build confidence in the neighborhoods from a standpoint of core neighborhood plan, because there's been a lot of discussion over the years about this project and that project and how it gets approved. But I think it's just a very important time for the city of Fargo, and those would be my comments.
This is really good information, and I like that we're planning and visualizing a future the best we can. I'm going to focus a little bit on boards and commissions. I know that it's a lot of work, but I'm not always so certain that we're doing it the best way possible. If we were inventing a system from scratch, I don't know if we'd be doing it the way we do it now, where so many of our boards and commissions are under the auspices and support systems of the Planning and Community Development Department. I don't know that makes sense sometimes, frankly. So I think we should sometimes reinvent the wheel or go back to a more core reinvention of what we do. A lot of our support for our boards and commissions, to me, doesn't make sense coming through planning and community development. It should come through our administrative staff. When we're doing minutes and agendas and things like that, I just think that's rock crunching stuff that takes a planner out of their field of expertise and turns them into an administrative assistant type person. And so I think we could reinvent some of that. I'm very, very committed to the role of boards and commissions, and my thinking isn't so much of how do we trim it down and pull in our belts and affect what we're doing, because it's a lot of work. I'd be more inclined to think of how do we breathe more life into them and get more community engagement and more public, so you're going to have more than 83 people. But that's where my head's at, is how do we reach out to the community more, better, and more effectively to get more engagement, more result with the people. It's our job, in my opinion, to take these boards and commissions and serve them. So I'm hesitant to go down the path of putting the message out that you're burdening us too much. And I don't know that's what we're saying, but I don't want to say that. My message to the boards and commissions is, how can we help you be more effective? How can we get more result? How can we get more engagement? How can we get more reach in the community? So that's where my head goes.
Well, I've got something to put on my refrigerator, because I'm glad you finally put down all the things your team has done. I think everybody in the planning department should be congratulated for all the hard work they do, because Nicole, you're exactly right. You do a lot of work underneath that we don't see until it comes forward as a plan or something that's going on. I especially like to report the density issue, in which we are struggling with right now. How in core neighborhoods do we put an apartment building versus putting a home? Where are we headed? And what I'd like to see coming out of your team is, where are we headed? Because I think it makes a difference. Are we going to put our grandparents' garages fixed up so grandparents can live on our property, or are we going to do different things with what's going on in the world right now? If millennials can't live in homes, where are they going to live? Our apartment's going to be our answer, or is there something else? My son lives out in West Roxbury in Boston, and if you look at the housing out there, it's stacked apartments. I mean, you park in the street. I mean, if you do a Google search, you'll just see piles of cars in the street. I don't even know how I just think of the logistics of two children and groceries trying to get to your house. And we always think a lot of times is you can drive right up to your garage, but in those places, you're parking on the street somewhere and doing something. But I think the challenges you put, and I think, John, what we're talking about at all the committees is stick to the purpose. What is the purpose of this committee, and what are they going to do? And are we sometimes straying? So that's more what I think Nicole and I are talking about, is that if their job is to give us advice as a commission, give us the advice of what you're ton to do. I know Davis had an hour-long lectures on stuff that has nothing to do with parking. It had to do with a lot of other things that's fine to do, but do that in a lecture or do it somewhere else. And then I think the biggest priority in some sense we have as our neighborhoods right now is to hear them. I don't know if they're going to like where the world is going. It's kind of like you've lived in your house for 40 years, things haven't changed, and you want that to stay that way. That's not what's happening in the world right now. But I think what we need is a vision. Here's where the world is going. And I love your stuff on density and how much we're going to grow in the next 50 years, because we're designing now for the people that are to come into our city. We're going to double the size of our city, and where are they going to live? What do they want for a community? Do they want it walkable? Do they want bikes? How do they want that built? And I was down at the farmers market this weekend, packed. People like those events. They love those types of things. People are all out, shopping, doing whatever. So it's obvious to me we have to hit the mark of where people headed if we're going to continue to be a community that grows. If we're not hitting the mark, people are not going to come to this community. So I think one of your challenges is to let's figure that out. And the only other thing I'd ask for is, Tony talked about quarterly reports. Maybe we need that just to see what you're doing, because we don't always go to the Planning Commission. We don't always see that, but maybe as a commission, we could ask you to give a quarterly report every now and then to tell us what you're doing. And then the last item that I'd ask you to be adaptable. Opportunities oftentimes come not at the best moment, but we have to adapt to them. And I think that's the hardest thing we have as city government, the hardest thing we have in our departments. Some things come up that are difficult, and it sometimes has to be you give a child hope that you're going to look into it, but dessert may not come till after the dinner. I mean, it's, Dad, I want a cupcake now. No, you're going to have to wait a bit. But just if something comes up, there are some ways of doing it sometimes, but we don't have a path right now, and we have to discover that. So, and I know you are, as a team, you're adaptable. We've adapted to many things that we thought would never evolve, but have evolved. So I just want to say thank you for all your hard work. Thank you.
And Mayor, I'll join in there for a moment. One example I've seen personally that works well is in the school district. At the end of every school agenda, you have a committee updates report. And we don't do that at our commission level. So each one of us sits on so many commissions and boards. I think it would be a good trial to add to our agendas, just a around the table updates. So if Commissioner Gunberg has something from planning, or if I have something community development, or Commissioner Pepcorn has something from tax exempt review, and so on, we're not all out in the dark. And we can kind of apprise each other. Just so you all know, this is coming now to you. We're discussing this at our committee level. We're working through this just to get us all kind of into the knowledge of where the others are at. And it just takes a few minutes, but it's a way of going around a table and getting us all closer to the same page on things that are evolving. So if something's happening over there in your department and your commissions and boards, we can kind of get a sense of that in a quick, brief update.
Can I add a couple more quick ones? It strikes me that the planning department is the most dense with committees of all the departments. I'm sure you guys have already realized that. And I think what strikes me is the turnover, and I hope it isn't because of, you know what I mean, that maybe you can talk about that. Are there some concerns that we as a commission should be addressing? Because I think you know that we value you. And you're all very important, and you're all very young and have very important jobs. But maybe you can talk about that, because to me, when you look at those numbers of how much turnover, we want to make sure that's not something that it's something that we are doing or should be doing.
No, I think, first of all, I didn't set this up to just receive praise, but thank you. And then, but second, I think I don't think the two are quite related. So I think it's a more, and if you look nationally, this is a trend happening everywhere, right? As people retire, they've maybe been in positions for 40 plus years, and then that person is really doing like 6 jobs by the time, that program grew with that person. And so as you break that down, so that's probably more of what's happening, and it's taking us a little while to find our feet because as that person retires, the whole society's changed as a whole. And so, like, for instance, if you go to a HUD training program, you'll find, in Denver, you'll find, like, there's one person there that's been doing it for like 30 years, and then everybody else has been doing it for like half a year. And so it's just this transition that's happening at a national level. But I think one thing, maybe just from a staff's perspective, is, and don't take this as complaining, but, we get tired of, fatigue is part of it, but I know you guys are the deep volunteers, so I take that lightly. But I think we want action, and so I think we want to do stuff. We want action, and so to sit and talk at meetings gets tiring, and so every meeting is a new idea. Every meeting is a new committee or subcommittee. We actually have a joke after one of our groups. I'm like, how many subcommittees got created today? And so we have to stay consistent and focused, and otherwise our system has to continue to grow. And I'm very thankful of the budget increases we've had over the years, and the staff increases we've had. So I'm very thankful for that. We wouldn't even be standing today if those hadn't happened. And so it's really, how do we build a sustaining program that can be citywide, that we can build upon, and not every day is a new idea. And new ideas are good. There's ways to vet them. That's why we have that decision tree. And we have to think of, why are we doing what we're doing? I think often we find solutions and the problem hasn't been vetted, and we need to vet the problem. And the way to vet the problem is to find who are the people that are experiencing that problem and hear from them firsthand. That's where the boards and commissions really are valuable, is to hear firsthand what the problems and needs are. And the amount of information I've learned of what our community experiences from the Human Relations Commission and the Native American Commission, just firsthand, their issues, we never would hear in another format at the city. And so, so it's vitally important, but it's not their job to educate us. It's our job to learn from them. And so how do we get deeper dialogue that's more meaningful and can create change while being respectful to governance structure, is our main question. So I don't know if I answered your question. But no, I don't think there's staff burnout from that. I think it's I think most of, probably 3/4 of those 17 staff changes are completely coincidental.
When they do the million cups at the end of it, they always ask this question, which I find interesting. How can my commissioners and myself help your staff do a better job? What is it that we can do to help you out so that you don't read something in the newspaper and say, I don't think that's what the commissioner meant? But is there ways we could help your team out?
Well, I don't know if you want the answers. And I'm not going to put my staff.
It can't involve budget.
Yeah. I'm not going to put you guys on the spot, so you're welcome to raise your hand if you want to talk. But I think focus and goals. And so that's probably where I'm going to sound like a broken record. If, again, my job is to deliver information. So here's one thing that we use as a mantra is my job is to give, our job, I should say, as the planning department, is to give you what you need to vote, what you need to make decisions. So that increased dialogue is important. And so we can give you our opinion, we can give you what we know, what we've experienced, try to speak on behalf of the community at large that we hear from. You all have your own, our constituents are your constituents. And so we can be that liaison for you, but, and I know time management is hard, but being able to be responsive and meet and dialogue and share your concerns and what we need to investigate. So I would say communication and focus is probably the main thing. And when we push back, it's because we're saying, hey, have we thought about everything? And you're all really great about that dialogue. I don't feel any pushback or negativity. I get a little nervous with the election coming up, but because my two liaisons are the ones up for election. But and so that whole system, right, can change based on who gets elected. And so how do we develop structure and sustainability and flexibility, because whoever comes into that office is going to have their own ideas and new ideas, and assuming these two don't get reelected or decide to run. And so, so in any case, that all goes into the mix, right? And so communication is number one. Communicating fairly, honestly, authentically is the primary purpose. Yeah.
Last thing I'd like to say too is, it's a lot of work. And we have a new city hall, but the city hall isn't a magic bullet. It's really important that we all like what we do. And it's important we love our jobs. And it's important we feel good about where we're at. And it's important we have those social interactions with each other. So everything else said and done. It's really critical when we walk into all of our various departments, people are smiling and they're happy and they feel fulfilled and that they feel gratified and that they feel supported. And that stuff is so important, Nicole, and for all your people. Make sure we always know. Like when Commissioner Pepcorns asks, is there something we don't know when there's turnover, that you help us look forward and make sure we see what's coming. And I think it's a priority for all of us that our people flourish and blossom and grow and reach their highest level of fulfillment they can, and that they just love their jobs. That's so important.
Just one last thing is when people reach out to the commissioners, we get a form letter from a neighborhood or need something that comes out. What I'd ask you all, just to, if you wouldn't respond to that, you're oftentimes internally working with us to solve the issue. If you could, whoever sent the letter, just send a letter to them and say we're working on it, because they sometimes, well, I haven't heard from anybody. That's not true. We're looking at it. We're looking deeply into it. And for John, sometime when the Roosevelt neighborhood goes up, I assume he's continuing the communication. But that may be my fault sometimes because I'm just assuming that. So just sometimes you guys get tasked with, well, I haven't heard from anybody. Well, you're working on it. So sometimes I think you're something that John is really communicating back to them. But I think for us as commissioners and mayor, if the staff just reaches out and says we're looking at it, that's fine, and then they know. And then if you make progress, just update them. And again, then you have to update all the commissioners as well, because then we need to know what's gone on. Because I feel a lot of times we get caught with the infamous, somebody sends a letter, and who takes responsibility for managing that letter or managing that problem. My assumption sometimes if I reach out and send you, Don, a letter or note, that you will look into it and take care of it. And then typically I'll eventually get an email back as it's taken care of. So that really helps me to solve those issues. But I know some questions are not a yes, no answer. They're a very in-depth question when they're asked, and they can't be solved in one email. It may take several to do that. But just in sensitivity to right now where somebody says nobody listens to us, I really dislike that comment when people says that, because all the commissioners almost trip over themselves to take care of issues if something comes up on our side. I'm fully aware of that. And I sometimes find 2 or 3 of the commissioners and myself are working on a problem. I said, we don't need to do that, but how can we just communicate that? But again, you're all doing a great job. I'm very pleased with that. I like the work plan that you're going forward. It clearly identifies the goals of the department, and you all each have a responsibility for it. And just remember, in my budget, you're worth millions of dollars to me, because sometimes you bring some money to the table as well. So that also helps us as well. So thank you.
Is we're adjourned?